Welcome to Talking Event Driven, the podcast about the world of event-driven architecture. You will hear seasoned professionals sharing invaluable insights about their challenges and experiences in event-driven architecture.
All right. Welcome to the podcast Event Driven. With me today is Emil Zegers. Emil Zegers is a customer success engineer at Solace, and I'll let him introduce himself first.
Yes, thanks, Bryan. Yeah, nice to be here in this podcast. My name is indeed Emil Zegers, living in the Netherlands, working at Solace as a solutions engineer, sales engineer, pre-sales, so the technical sales solution side. That's the shortest introduction on what I currently do.
All right, great. Since you work at Solace and so on, you have a history and exposure to event-driven architecture. This is exactly what our podcast is about. So could you maybe elaborate a bit how you first got exposed to event-driven architecture and eventing as a whole?
Yes,
and,
sure. A little bit of background. I work at Solace for a bit less than 2 years now. Solace as a company already exists 24 years. They started in 2000, Canadian company. My first exposure to event-driven was actually not with Solace. It was Kafka, which is probably not a big surprise for many people in the eventing world. So in my previous job at MongoDB, there was also a lot of Kafka. That was actually the first time that I saw at an enterprise level that eventing played a big role. And that was at one of the bigger supermarket chains, Ahold Delhaize, which is a famous brand in the Benelux anyway. And there you saw that, especially with the movement to more DevOps-oriented way of working, the flexible way of working with eventing solutions, became part of their strategy. When I entered Solace after leaving MongoDB, I learned quickly that some of the companies I have been working with for quite some time in the past also moved to becoming event-driven or being event-driven. And that's a very interesting cycle because, like I said, the company is not that new and eventing already exists since the 80s. So not sure what your history is with eventing, but it's probably also not a bit more than just 1-2 years. So it's what I think is very interesting is to see that it now catches on in a lot of different industries and actually works for industries where previously there were strict separations between business units or data was, and I love data silos, by the way. That's one of my favorite statements, but maybe more on that later. But what you see with eventing, in my opinion, you can also rephrase becoming event-driven with real-time business. And that might directly raise the question, what is real-time? Because it means not the same for every type of business. But if you want direct responses on what's happening in your business processes, then eventing can become interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a quite provocative statement that you make. I love data silos. I'm just gonna ask because I think a lot of people will wonder.
Yeah.
Do elaborate on that one.
Yeah. Now, the reason why I like to say that, and I worked previously at MongoDB, also at other data platforms, and one of the taglines usually is, we have to break down or even destroy the data silos. My perspective on data silos is data silos are part of usually expert applications where highly skilled people are working on important parts of business processes. So instead of focusing on destroying the silo, and I know it's more like a figure of speech, of course, but you should focus on exchanging or being able to exchange data with those applications, and some can do that by default. For some, you might have to build something or add something, but I do believe in exchanging the data both ways, bidirectional, every direction you want. But I think that those data silos as part of expert applications with highly skilled people who know a lot about critical business processes are actually also one of the cornerstones of your company. So that's the reason why I say don't destroy them, just make them cooperate with and exchange data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in a certain sense, you need a highly specialized setup somewhere with very specific domain lingo and so on. Just keep it there and try to connect it in a very transparent way. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and that leads to another statement that I'm sure you also know and maybe also often use, that if you decouple data from applications, that gives you the possibility to reuse data. And decoupling data is not taking away the data from the application. There's a difference, in my opinion, between decoupling data and data responsibility and data access approval and that kind of stuff. So that's another territory to explore. But decoupling the data gives you some options to provide access also through self-service and not depending on resources that those expert applications might have, and they might not be waiting for all the people coming knock on the door, give me data, because they are actually busy with those critical processes. So I do believe in decoupling data, or whatever you want to phrase it, but those data silos, like you said, they are usually there to stay.
Yeah. And in that sense, the events also give you sort of an extra leverage, because typically if you start building a typical enterprise data model where everything needs to be contained in entities and so on, it's difficult to draw the line where certain couplings or decouplings need to come. So the events give you an exact context of what's going on somewhere and who's going to tell you about it in the business context.
True. And then what you're saying in those lines about talking about an enterprise data model, or there's different ways to phrase it, but that's a common way to at least that I hear a lot, also here with the customers here in the Benelux. If you have such an enterprise data model, it does not mean that people can no longer decide on how to use the data or what data to produce. The only structure that you offer is, hey, if we use this enterprise data model together, we can all work on the same kind of data. And if you make that event driven, then you can just publish and subscribe to your data and make it real time. Well, that's a very short summary. It takes usually a bit more time in a company to implement, but
yeah, I can imagine. You also mentioned real time a lot. Have you had probably lots of very practical use cases where real time made a difference? Because we often get the question like, okay, most of my business works right now. It doesn't need to be real time.
No.
Why would I need it?
No, and real time. Well, I'm not sure if this is also a good statement, but I have not seen very much silver bullets in any part of IT. So real time is not a silver bullet either. The thing with real time, and real time usually means something different also in different parts of different industries. Real time in air traffic control is something different than real time in manufacturing. Where I do see that it makes a big impact is, for example, in retail. And the funny thing in this that you, even though retail, and I think that's a global thing. In retail, you might actually have expected it to happen earlier. This move to event driven. They are still front runners in retail, in my opinion. They are always agile and not necessarily happy to change, but they can change fast in retail. For them, responding to customer behavior or the weather or whatever is impacting their sales or new campaigns being run, that's really driving their business. If margins are small, then you have doesn't make sense to keep the sun cream in your stores when autumn is coming. So they always have to respond fast. So real time for them is critical, but still critical. Or critical means if you are faster than anything sub-second from a customer experience perspective is interesting, but in the internal processes, real time is I think it's still in the order of seconds to minutes. Usually, it's not like sub-second real time requirements.
Yeah, depends on the context indeed. If you have rocket steering, a second is a lot of time.
Exactly.
In retail, it's a different story.
And we can go there to the sub-second because I told you a little bit more about Solace a while ago, but if you look at the history where Solace grew up, that was actually in finance and the capital market. So when you talk about eventing, you usually start talking about event brokers. And before a broker was a piece of software or a piece of hardware, it was actually also, and still is, a profession. It was a profession also on the stock exchange floors, where they were taking both the buying and selling orders. And the moment that the stock exchanges went digital, those guys, usually guys, a lot of guys, if you look at Wall Street, the movie, for example, they disappeared. First they had paper, then they got a phone, they got a computer, and then they were gone. And that was the time when all the banks went to as close as possible to those stock exchanges with their own data centers and their fiber optics. And then you're talking about actually nanoseconds, microseconds performance. And I'm not making this up. There's actually papers on that on our website. But this is the place, high frequency trading, where you talk about microseconds, latency. That's real time. But everyone else is still happy with anything close to a second. In most of them, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. It's usually a number of use cases. At least in my experience, a lot of the places don't need it because they also don't think about the way they can create value with real time. They don't ask the question right now because it's not possible. So it's also a question of enabling it, and then that opens a certain door that you would never walk through otherwise.
True, and that is very important, because when you get access to more up-to-date real-time data, that's also when the business becomes interested again to start working on different use cases. It's not just a technical feature. That's very important to mention. I think when you talk about real-time data or real-time processes, it's actually something that can help the business. And also, for example, especially in OT, so in the factories, in the breweries, there, of course, you are also talking about different response times, and you have to sometimes act very swiftly. But even that data can also feed in to the business and enable them to do predictions on maybe on maintenance, but also in the end on what's going to happen in the market. So the option to have real-time data at your fingertips, that's an interesting topic also to discuss with the business owners.
Yeah, I usually make the example there of the airport, for example, where you can scan your boarding pass at the gates before the security check, and if you have real-time data, by the time you're through the security check, you can give someone an upgrade to the lounges, for example, on certain conditions. If you have something that updates hourly, or even half an hourly, you might be too late. He might already be somewhere at a gate or in a cafe or something else. He's not going to come to your lounge. So the real-time aspect there, it's a use case that makes something possible that would previously not have been.
And that's a very good addition, because real-time doesn't necessarily mean you have to respond all the time and data is shooting everywhere. It means acting at the right time. And in your example about airports, we have also a few of those customers. For example, what you see a lot, both, for example, Schiphol Airport, but also Hong Kong, they are looking at not only automating a lot of, in a way, physical processes, but also making them autonomous. So, for example, when disabled people enter the airport, that there will be an automatic wheelchair available for them. When you move to the luggage hall, you know the idea. Everyone's around that belt, waiting for their luggage to arrive. Why not just send just in time, like you said, a message? Hey, your suitcase is on the belt now, instead, or in a minute. So you just only walk there when you need to. But that's the other aspect that real-time data enables, is just-in-time operations.
All right. And if we go about implementing all of it, a common question that kind of comes up is, how do I actually get started with all of this? So oftentimes it's seen as, okay, I need an integration strategy. I need some kind of event-based integration strategy, but the value is more if you see it in the larger context of a business. So how do you typically see that come in and evolve over time and so on?
There's different flavors. That's usually the case in IT anyway. But I think you're right. The interesting part is that eventing has become a main part of integrations. When I used to walk into a company, whether it's a bank or an energy company in the 90s or the 2000s, middleware and integration was already there, but it was almost never attached to real time or eventing. It was always very, it's not slow, but reactive. Most of the middleware, even if there were API calls, this was all, of course, request response based. What you see now that integration, at least for example, at the larger companies, has a more central role in the overall IT strategy. And I think even today at the event where I was, I heard some numbers on IT spend and which part is actually spent on integration. And it went up from 5 to 10% in the 90s to some cases 20, 30, 40% now. So integration is apparently also taking a bigger part now of your IT budget. And I think that's of course, it's always a bit of chicken and egg, but that's all only happening because it's a value driver at the moment. It actually enables the business to achieve new goals or to achieve the same in a faster and smarter and maybe more cost-effective way. So maybe that's a long way to give an answer, but the trend that I see in a lot of companies is that even when data usage or real-time data usage is becoming more and more distributed, there's an integration team with a central view, strategy, implementation plan on how to direct the whole use of data for the business, for the company, from one piece. So they are orchestrating, but not setting boundaries anymore, because the responsibility is still with the business or the IT.
Yeah. And how do you see the governance model then? You need to define how you're talking about things, so API contracts or schemas or whatever you want to call it. And on the other hand, you also have like, okay, this is how I want to organize my data streams in a certain sense. Like, this is where my airport's ticket scanning information is at. That needs to be controlled in a certain fashion, because otherwise it's a huge cowboy landscape where everyone gets to do whatever he wants.
Yeah, I think most of the brokers, whether it's and queuing solutions and any messaging solution, maybe they started as relatively technical solutions. What you see is that more and more governance and management is being added, because I think there's at least two reasons for that. One is that I see that data is becoming more and more used as an asset, and if you manage assets, you want to do lifecycle management on them. So, for example, and there's also a lot of legal obligations now. I think that's all over Europe. For example, if you build a bridge, if you are a construction company, you build a bridge, you no longer go out with a plan, build a bridge and say goodbye. No, you have to, from the start, from the first drawing to the point that this bridge will actually be demolished at the end of its lifetime, maybe in 150 years, you have to keep track of everything that's going on. So that's of course, it's a physical asset, but this becomes represented in the digital world, and usually that opens also the door for companies to not only think anymore about projects, but about data streams, like you said. So a lot of companies are moving away from products or projects to actually looking at their data landscape as a whole. And in a similar way as we manage software, we are now also starting to manage the data. And event data is also just data. It's just a representation of that data. So if you start thinking about becoming event-driven, or if you are already event-driven, it makes sense to add governance, if it's not already a requirement anyway, to the way you work with the events. So, and to enable that, because that's the other side. For example, we as in the Solace PubSub platform also offer the event portal. Of course, there's the broker, that's the foundation. You can mesh them, you can scale them left and right and up and down. You can create this global mesh, how you perform, blah, blah, blah. But that's just the technical features. And after 20 years, most of the people, at least that work with Solace brokers, believe that we do check all the technical features that are required. what is interesting now is that most of the questions that we actually get are around governance and management of what they're doing. So, and that often leads to a design first strategy, that you first actually design your event model, and you can do that together with the business. You can actually, in the PubSub portal, do it in the designer. It's like a whiteboard. But the next step is not only to have this drawing on the wall, but also to use that drawing and to implement that to your runtime deployment. So not only are you drawing your process flows with your events, with your applications, with your application domains, but you're also attaching the topics to those events. You're subscribing queues to those topics. You are, of course, applying your access permissions on those queues for the consuming and producing applications. And then you just say, deploy. And if you're happy, you will promote it from dev to test to production. And then you're starting to do lifecycle management on your event data too. And I think more or less, no, I think it's more than less, fortunately. But that makes sense also from the idea that when we started with the digital transformation, we were talking about becoming data-driven and data-centric and treating data as an asset. And if you can put all those tech lines behind each other, but if you're not doing the full lifecycle management on this whole event processing, then it's not a complete, it's not an empty shell, but then it's not complete. So more and more we are trying, and we're not unique in that, but we are trying to fill all those gaps to offer full lifecycle management also on your event data.
Yeah, so you can do the design process ahead of time, and in a certain sense also shift the data quality towards the sources, so they speak in certain data contracts and so on. All right, cool. And you also mentioned, for example, the usage of that data. Is an event a usable piece of information to you in a data analytics standpoint, or do you think it needs to be projected into specific data models first?
There's.
Should I give a practical example?
I'm just going over the examples, but if you have a good example, let me know. Just go ahead.
Well, your events describe a certain behavior, like an order has been closed, an order has been shipped, it has been delivered, and the customer has entered his review or something about the entire process. You could say, okay, we project this into a specific state and as a data product. It's a heavy term nowadays, but as a data product in analytics or somewhere else. But are the events also important to you to expose in a sort of a data platform or something else where you can think about projecting them in different ways as well?
Yeah, they are. And there's various, like you said already, use cases, but also reasons to do that. Because an event usually means more within the context either of multiple of the same events, or when you enrich it, or when you aggregate it over time, or when you follow the complete flow for an event and analyze that data. So, I'm sure you know there's customers that produce literally hundreds of thousands or even millions of events per second, 24/7 if necessary. Some of the data is very valuable by itself. Think about financial transactions. You don't want to lose any one of those. Some of them are not that relevant. If you miss an update of your smart meter, okay, I'll pick the next one in the coming 5 seconds. Nobody is worried. But if you talk about analytics, and that was also the reason why I was hesitating a bit to answer. I'm still trying also to understand in a way. Because we have been talking a long time about transactional data and analytical data, and another thing I used to say was all transactional data is analytical data after the transaction. So the boundary, the boundary is also moving there. So when will you actually do analytics, and what do you need to do these analytics? I still think it makes sense to collect data, for example, in a data lake. That can be another access from your event hub or whatever you like to call it, where you will aggregate data over time. You might actually come up with use cases that you have not thought about, and only then start processing the data. But if it comes to representations of the data. And that's also related to the data silos. A lot of events all events have an origin. But usually the origin is dictated by the application they come from. So that means that a lot of data from ERP, especially ERP applications, are in a specific shape, which is not good enough or not complete enough for the next application. So there's a lot of also sometimes even real-time data enrichment going on, or data mapping, or data transformation, which, by the way, at Solace is not actually part of what's happening in the broker. The broker is just the mailman delivering the envelopes. We do not look into the mail, but we make sure that it gets at the right time, at the right spot. But yeah, that's what we see, that the combination of this brokering with an iPaaS platform or an integration platform, or whatever you prefer, that's now also offering more possibilities to use cases, business, to actually do something with the data. So that's another, well, it's not a new field, but another field that's really growing nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Right. Nice. Have any practical examples of that?
Yeah, because one of the things I was thinking about is actually what Eurocontrol is doing. They get Eurocontrol is the European air traffic control organization, and in Europe we have like a patchwork of 40 plus countries. Every country, of course, has its own national air traffic control, but they are also all required to send all their information to Eurocontrol. And when you talk about flights, it's first about scheduling a flight. You cannot just take a plane and go somewhere. You have to follow your plan, I think, at least 2 or 3 days, maybe even more ahead. At least for the commercial flights. Of course, you can hire planes and stuff, but that's a different.
If you're small enough, then you can just fly.
That can go very well. But you have to schedule your flights, and then, of course, that's, I think, on average, during business hours, there are like 5,000 planes in the air over Europe. On rush hours in the sky, it can go up to 15,000. And all of these planes, they take off more or less according to their flight plans, and then start, of course, sending their data. What Eurocontrol is doing is on a continuous basis calculating the least worst scenario. Of course, because everything always deviates from plan. That's even the A-team. Well, that's an old memory, but they had a plan, and then they had to make it work. So you always have to deviate a little bit from your plan, and that's just what happens. But when 5,000 planes are all deviating a little bit from their plan, then you have to do really smart analytics, and it's even it's a predictive model. I'm not going to put the AI sticker on everything, but it's a predictive model. If this plane has this delay and we can send it to that landing strip 2 minutes later, then it will not impact too much, because that plane can go off a bit earlier, or that can wait. So that's really, in my opinion, that's a very good example of real-time analytics. On the other hand, the data is also just stored for a longer time for regulatory purposes. So there's very often multiple use cases for the same data, and the same data might not even completely mean the same in a different context. So I'm not sure if that's the example you're looking for, but I think it's because one part I forgot. Not only is Eurocontrol doing these calculations, but it also needs to feed back that information to those 40 plus national air traffic controls, because they need to take action. It's not Eurocontrol calling the planes, hey, you have to wait, or you have to circle 2 more rounds around Heathrow Airport, whatever. They have to feed it back. So that's a very short cycle. So I always forget if it's 5 or 15 seconds, there's an update. And within that time interval, they have to do the calculations and feed back the information to the national air traffic controls. And those air traffic controls need to interact with the planes in their control zone to take the necessary actions.
Yeah, it's a very tight requirement.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I think we're nearing the end of our time. Would you like to make any closing statements?
Now, yes, of course I do. What I like in the field of integration, because when I entered IT, I was the young guy. What I like to see in integration nowadays is that it's also it's the field where a lot of things are happening, and a lot of also young people are entering now. So well, I will be open about it. There was a time when integration was not the most active
Sexy.
field. Yeah. So and that has really changed. And what I like about that is because at the moment integration connects very well with the business. Actually, some of our customers, of course, we are always happy if they find us as a solution that fits their needs. But most of the customers that we work with, they all started with a strategy around integration. And usually, I wanted to say, of course, but usually event-driven or real-time, whatever you like to call it, or with high interest in customer experience is a big part of nowadays business strategy. So if you start with such a strategy, and that does not mean you have to change everything overnight, don't do that. It gives you actually the options with the modern integration platforms, with the modern eventing platforms, to start small but influence a lot and grow fast and still stay flexible. So that's it. Always, when I make such a statement, I'm always curious how the world will look in 5 or 10 years, because I come from, I worked long in geospatial, then I did a lot with big data, and it's always at a certain point in time you make a statement and you say, oh, well, integration is not happening now, and it is, because it really drives the business. It's not, it used to be like the snack bar where people came and we need this, you need to, we put this on the bus and we need a queue, but now that has changed. But the responsibility is still with the business. So that's what I like. Integration does not dictate what you should do, but it really is an enabler at the moment.Maybe that's the closing statement.
Yeah. All right. Interesting perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I'll thank you for being here, and
my pleasure.
I hope you had fun.
I had. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Was good. Thanks. See you then. Bye, Bryan.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Talking Event Driven. We hope you enjoyed the insights and stories shared by our incredible guests as much as we did. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. Stay tuned for more enlightening conversations. Until next time, keep innovating and stay event driven.